Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Fast Talk, your source for the science of endurance performance. I'm your host, Chris Case, here with Dr. Griffin McMath. Emerging technologies, things like augmented reality or AR, mapping apps, GPS tracking, drones, are changing what it means to explore, take risks, and stay safe in the wild. What are we gaining and what are we losing? Those are the questions we try to answer in today's episode with the help of adventure photographer, filmmaker, bikepacker, and endurance athlete Chris Burkard. Known for pushing physical limits to tell compelling stories of wild places, Chris is someone I think is perfectly placed to help us understand where and when technology has a place in the wild, and when we might be better off setting it aside. I've ridden with Chris in his adopted home of Iceland, and I've seen him in his preferred element. The more raw it is, the bigger the smile on his face. So you might think that Chris is a minimalist when it comes to tech gadgetry outdoors. Not true, at least not always. Is AR turning us into smarter adventurers or just passive consumers? Has GPS made us overly reliant or given us a dangerous sense of false confidence? Are drones a performance tool or just a disruption? We'll tackle all of these questions and many more. And then Chris will share his must-have list of gear that he won't leave home without. The kit he takes when traveling with family to the slightly more robust setup that weighs him down on the most arduous of expeditions. Some tech is just too good to give up. Speaking of technology and tools at our disposal, today's episode is sponsored by MetPro. And in this episode, we're going to talk about all sorts of different technologies and tools and emphasize the fact that nutrition is often one of those neglected things where we don't take advantage of some of the technologies. But when we're talking about big adventures, big days on foot, on the bike, out there in the wild, nutrition is extremely important and planning ahead is extremely important. Trevor, what do you think about that? Would you agree?
Yeah, I've said this before on the show. If I'm going to a crit and I forget my nutrition, who cares? I'll get through the race.
Right.
When you're doing an adventure event like this, where you're often riding, running, whatever it is, for 10 plus hours a day and you're in the middle of nowhere, if you don't have that nutrition dialed in, you're not getting out of there.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, we had an episode a while back now with Dee Dee Greasepower.
Yes, episode 247.
Where she talked about winning the Ultra Ironman World Championships. And I remember on that episode, she said that if she didn't have her nutrition dialed in every single day, she wasn't finishing the event, let alone winning it.
Right. And that's where MetPro comes in.
Yep.
Helps you plan.
This is what I like about MetPro, and this is why we've brought them on as a sponsor of the show. I don't think that generally counting calories works for people because it is reactive. You kind of eat through the day, and then at the end of the day, you see what calories you ate, but it doesn't prep you. It isn't planning. It's reactive. What MetPro does is take nutrition and turn it into a training plan, which is something that we're all very familiar with. So you map out your nutrition ahead. You prep your meals ahead of time. It sets you up for success. And for something like an adventure tech ride or race, it's absolutely essential to have that all mapped out, all planned out, know exactly what you're going to be doing. And this is the sort of thing that MetPro helps you with.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, MetPro isn't just a tech. It isn't just an app. They have actual nutrition coaches there. So if you're preparing for a big event, they're going to spend time with you, talking with you, and helping you figure out what is the perfect nutrition for that event for you.
Excellent. Well, right now, Fast Talk listeners can get a complimentary metabolic profiling assessment and a one-on-one consultation with a MetPro coach to build that perfect performance plan. Go to metpro.co/fast talk. That's metpro.co/FASTTALK and see what your metabolism is really capable of. So let's step back and assess how technology has reshaped what it means to be an explorer. Time to check the tech. Let's make you fast.
Hey, we are here.
Yes, we are here and so excited to welcome one of the most special guests I could imagine having on Fast Talk. I am particularly geeked and stoked today and rare. We actually are able to talk to this guest when he is on U.S. soil, which I feel like is not typical. Let's do a brief intro from someone who got to ride with him recently in the flesh.
Yeah. Excited to have Chris on the show as well. You know, a lot of people know him or think they know him because they've seen photos of his, they've seen movies of his, they've seen his very active social media posts. But I got to ride with him, and maybe people are saying, why is this guy on your show? Well, dude's an athlete too. You know, he's done Tour Divide, he's done Silk Mountain Race, he's ridden across Iceland in winter. You've done some stuff with Kurt Refsnyder, some legends of bikepacking. Yeah, I mean, you are an athlete. I would assume you think of yourself as not just a photographer, but an athlete, an outdoor adventure athlete. And so we're super excited to have a conversation with you about that aspect of your life, but also how tech integrates into your life as an athlete, photographer, and adventurer.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm stoked to be here. Honestly, for me, it's like a real refresher and a reprieve to be able to have a chat, specifically a podcast that's not about photography, that's not about kind of that part of my life, which is super fun. And I love it to death, making films and working on commercial assignments. But it's that time out in nature with friends, usually through sport. I think that's like where my passions lie. So I love geeking out on all aspects of what makes it possible, and I'm stoked to be here.
I think one of the things that made you an especially compelling guest for me when we come to the topic of adventure athletes and tech and what that kind of intersection looks like, you are someone who has access to some of the most amazing gear possible for some of the most remote destinations and some of the most rugged conditions. You also have one of the best attitudes and maintain an amazing level of stoke no matter what. But known for pushing physical, environmental limits, telling compelling stories regardless, we figured that if anyone had great insight to how tech is starting to impact those who are adventure athletes and what that looks like, it'd probably be you.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is an interesting intersection because it really does combine both parts of my life, right? And there's the conversation around documentation, like media within the adventure athlete space. And that certainly, we all know that's been hugely impacted by tech. You look at what's possible on an action camera or a phone or a tiny little point and shoot camera these days, and how feasible it is to document your own experience, tell a story from those environments. That alone to me is super significant. And it's actually changed the way that I've been able to do my job too, because in the past, if I wanted to go make a cycling film that was an adventure film, you'd really need to have proper cameras, bigger, larger cameras with you at all times. And that's just going to slow down the process, make it quite a bit more challenging. But now with the capabilities we have in such small packages, most of the experiences I've had way out in the boonies, wherever, and I'm filming it or I'm documenting it, it's with something really tiny. It's with something micro, a Sony RX100, this point and shoot camera that you would, 10 years ago, you would have needed something massive to do that. So I am constantly blown away. So there's kind of that portion of it to answer that question. But then there's also sort of the side of things where, that we're maybe more aware of the monitoring of basically everything we do, right? Whether it's the Whoop or whether it's the Chorus or whether it's our steps or our heart rate. And then when you think about the fact that at the end of the day, it can spit out a score for you is really fascinating. And I would say when you couple that with the constant glucose monitors, that's the most exciting place I can start to see the advances, because as someone who has been on these longer expeditions or places that are, they're asking a lot of your body and your mind, whether it's cold or whether it's really hot, a lot of times where I always feel the most intrigued is how I'm fueling for this trip really efficient. So what I'm getting at here, this whole full circle thing, is that I'm really excited for tech to be able to inform us in real time if what we're eating is actually fueling us, is actually helping, right? So when you think about having a constant glucose monitor and you think about having all this documentation, whether it's a phone or whether it's an app that's connected, you're out there doing some, 16-day bikepacking trip or race or whatever it is, and you always start to wonder, like, wow, is what I'm reaching for at the gas station or the thing, are these the best options? Obviously not, right? But if you can get some real-time data, that's super exciting.
I want to hit you with another question. This is probably jumping ahead a little bit, but I feel like it's the place to ask. I can tell that you are a fan of technology. You use it constantly in your job being as a photographer, filmmaker, content maker. Do you ever just put it down? Do you ever put down the technology and say, I don't need to take this photo, I just need to take in this view?
because the technology is distracting me from the experience.
You know, what's interesting is I think that, we are all a byproduct of how much time we spend with that equipment, right? And I realize that for some people, having a phone with them or on them or like documenting with their phone, that is almost like abrasive to the experience. For me, being used to going places with a backpack that's like 60 pounds full of heavy metal and lenses and everything and film cameras, when I don't have that, this feels like nothing. You know what I mean? So
Right.
I guess what I'm pointing out is like, I really appreciate the times that I get to put my camera down. I really appreciate the times I get to put technology down. And I actually find that transmutes, all experiences. If every time you go and ride your bike or you go for a run and you are constantly interpreting how well you performed by looking at numbers, I really think that people are setting themselves up to have a slightly unhealthy relationship with that experience. That's just my personal opinion. Because if it's always calculated and calibrated and there's always a finish line or a goal, you really truly miss out on the fact that in the beginning, it wasn't about that. It was about just fun. It was about joy. It was about escape. It was whatever, health, I don't know. But for me, it's the same thing with photography, right? Like I'm speaking from that experience where having technology around me all the time, when I get the chance to strip that away and pause or reflect a little deeper on what is in front of me, it gives way to something really important, which is experiencing what is happening and not just clicking the shutter or documenting it or looking at it with a critical eye, which people kind of forget about. That when you get to look and appreciate something for just what it is, and you're not trying to think about how you can best filter it or experience it or document it or this and that, like it's a challenging thing. I go to a concert, my favorite musician of all time, and if I'm shooting a photo, my whole focus is shooting this photo. It's almost hard to take in the other auditory experience because you're too focused on the visual experience, right? So all I'm saying is like, that's the difference, right? It's like sitting there in a seat, enjoying it or working. And I feel like, yes, learning to actually put the camera down and experience something has been probably the most important lesson that I've had to learn in the last 10 years. By doing so, it's really informed my ability to, I think, tell more meaningful stories because I'm experiencing that. But I also think what happens, and I'm just speaking to photographers here mostly, which is that in the beginning, you don't feel safe putting it down because you want to make sure you're getting the moment that you need.
You don't want to miss it.
Yeah, exactly. And then as time goes on, your experience builds and you kind of know. And it's the same thing. You go on a hard bike ride. You don't always need a watch to tell you that it was hard. Sometimes you can just know. It's
That's
actually
right.
maybe cooler to do that because it informs something different. It reminds you that you are in tune with that experience. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. It's critically important to what I do, for sure.
I love this question because to me, nothing better symbolizes this. And to me, I see you in this exact scene. It's the Sean Penn scene in the movie Walter Mitty. And Sean Penn is this adventure photographer and he sees the thing he's been looking for. And the magical shot that he is waiting for happens. And his character is so in awe of it. Ben Stiller's character goes, "Why are you going to take the picture?" And he goes, "Sometimes that actually ruins the moment." And he puts this mega camera down and he says, "Just appreciate it." And also it's one of the best soundtracks ever in case you like Jose Gonzalez. But going back to this, I think before we dive into the future of tech and what's rolling out right now, because you've had such a beautiful career speckled with all of these different tech advances, some of the ones you've already mentioned, I'm kind of curious to see if we can just do a quick, are there any tech advances in the last couple of decades that you can say, I remember when this came out and this is the change it made?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the GoPro, probably specifically, the action camera, the birth of the action camera. I remember that pretty vividly only because it was a really interesting time in photography because prior to that moment, you really had to have a waterproof housing and a camera to go in the water to shoot anything or to be able to shoot in kind of those harsh environments, whether it's snow, whether it's water, whether it's like dirt and grime. So the birth of the action camera changed everything. I mean, it was wild. And every company had one. Sony had one and DJI had one and yada, yada, yada. And so that now is its own category. That was never even a category before, never even a business. Now it's like there's like thousands and thousands of jobs, right, that are dedicated just to that space and millions and billions of dollars. So interesting to me because that it didn't just like change photography, but it changed the whole media market and filmmaking and everything. And the far-reaching effects of that were probably the most significant in the last 50 years in photography. That's significant. And then I would say like with that slowly came the phone and what that's able to do, right? So the phone kind of started to morph into that as well. And what's unique is that I remember vividly that experience where you're realizing, well, every person has a camera on them. So technically everybody's a photographer. Because what's the distinction? What becomes a distinction? And I guess that's where I started to question things a little bit personally and feel like, well, what am I personally? Am I just a photographer? Is this just like my tool of choice and I pull it up and I use it? Or am I trying to do something deeper, tell a story? And the medium can be anything. And I'm just sharing with you the evolution of that thought and how it affected me personally. And that personal growth looked like this. It looked like me starting to recognize that if I wanted to last in this industry, I would need to learn some other skills and I would need to learn how to direct and I need to learn how to write. And so, yeah, I started to make books and do a lot of other things. So it affected me a lot, at least in the way that I thought about things.
I love how you've talked about everything from film to CGM. And today we'll talk a little bit about augmented reality, GPS. We'll talk about drones, which I can only imagine for both of you. That one's a big one. But first, maybe let's just dive into one of those. And I think one of those that makes adventure possible, and then in some ways, some would argue, can instill false confidence in not so experienced adventure athletes is GPS. It's great to know, but sometimes the more we think we know, the more we actually don't. And so can we start with GPS, especially you two, you've been on expeditions?
Yeah. Are we thinking like specifically more of the SOS GPS devices like the Garmin inReach?
Yeah.
I can click a button and I can get rescued. Is that kind of the thought?
I have that plan on my Garmin too. I was the first purchase I made. I was like, beam me up, Scotty. I want out.
Yeah, they're awesome. I mean, I genuinely think that that has been probably alongside the GoPro. It's funny because that was the second thing I was going to mention was basically a personal tracker and or a satellite communication that has really allowed for so many more people to feel confident or competent taking on those things. And it is a bit dangerous, right? I always relate it to like it's, for me, coming from the surf world, it's sort of like a SUP in the lineup, like a stand-up paddle in the surf lineup, which is, there's no problem with that. Like stand-up paddles are rad. But what it does is sometimes it allows somebody with less experience to be out in a place where they shouldn't be, putting everybody else at risk, which is basically the exact same thing, right? So you have this larger device, you can get out there and you can take off on the wave before anybody else because you have all this volume. Now, I think about that and folks who have maybe chosen to bite off an adventure with maybe a little less regard for like what it might require to safely get out of there. And I've definitely certainly traveled with a lot of people that I feel like maybe they take more risks than I would. And I kind of love that. I kind of love thinking about how that affects certain people's mentality. You know, I definitely find myself to be very conservative when it comes to how I approach like expedition type of experiences. And I definitely don't ever like the idea that the GPS could make me feel more confident.
Is there a trip, an expedition, a crossing of a glacier perhaps, that you've done now because of the existence of technology that you wouldn't have done prior to its existence?
Oh, absolutely. 100,000%. Yeah. I would never have crossed Iceland's glaciers, any of them, without it. I mean, I just would not have done that, you know? And it's funny because since I've been around alive or in this field, this has almost always been an option. You know, and I don't mean like GPS has not been there for like 40 years in this format, but for me at the peak window of when I have been experiencing places like this, it's always been an option. And I think a lot about the fact that, you know, the first year that they did the Tour Divide, there wasn't anything like this. And in fact, smartphones weren't even a thing. You know what I think? I feel almost more worried about not having a smartphone with me. If I had to choose between the two, I think I'd rather have a smartphone than I would a GPS, just like a GPS device, only because the amount of map data that I usually have on my phone is way more valuable to me, right? Because I can look at the shading and, there's trips that I've done in Iceland where you're going in and out of valleys, skiing across, a pretty popular hiking trail in the summer, but in the winter, it's super gnarly and there's geothermal vents. And I'm like, where am I exactly on this trail? I know that the little inReach screen is great, but like when you really want to know and you're cross-referencing with multiple maps, I don't know about you, but that's the level of anxiousness I find myself in, so I'm cross-referencing Gaia and I'm looking at, topo this and blah, blah. And so that's just kind of how I operate. And I feel like this is to me, more of a safety device in a lot of capacity.
Is there an uptick in a place like Iceland that you know of in terms of people getting into dangerous situations above their heads because they have a false sense of confidence because they have a phone or they have a device and they think they can push the button and get evacuated quickly? Or how to use this technology. You have multiple sources so you can cross-reference where's that geothermal vent. I need to know where it is to avoid it. Whereas others might just say, oh, it's not on my Google map, so I think I'm good. Like, have you seen the negative repercussions of having this technology in the hands?
Absolutely. I mean, way more so than ever. I mean, you also have to consider that it's interesting because this kind of bleeds into something else, which is social media, right? Social media, given that when you post your Strava activity or you post your anything, it's on your Coros thing, it's on your Ride with GPS, it's on your whatever. It doesn't really matter where it ends up, but all of these things are still, they're basically social media. It's a way for us to socially engage with other people's content, whether that's a bike ride or whether it's an Instagram post or whatever.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you're the, most superior athlete in the world, you're still using this thing, right? And so what I'm saying is that now somebody could look at my trail or my route or my whatever, and it's posted publicly and be like, oh, cool, I'm going to go do that too. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And without all of the disclaimers and unless I write an actual dictionary sized novel about the training and the preparation and the this and the that, nobody will really understand that, hey, this is super freaking dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And I've purposefully not published a lot of routes that I've ridden because there's serious river crossings and it's not something that I would want someone to go do unless they had swiftwater rescue understanding or they were with a friend or they knew how to cross it safely, because you're out in the middle of nowhere and rescue is, maybe it's a phone call away, but that would be way too late. So ultimately there's routes that I've kept offline. And I think that what's interesting about it is that basically what I'm getting at is people can now see these options that in the past they might not have, and without any understanding of what it might take to be there, or just simply with no information, of what gear do you even need, it kind of creates a lot of gray area.
I love this point that you're mentioning. First off, so much respect for you for having a sense of stewardship and responsibility of I could share it, but would this increase a liability or risk for others and not recognized? And it brings up this conversation about people confusing visibility with accessibility, right? Just because I can see it means I can do it. And in a different scale, if you were to use something like Google Maps, they've started to, in the summer, if you're in an urban area, sometimes you'll get an alert when it detects you're in a certain location and says, don't leave animals or kids in cars. That they've started to assess some safety things. And sometimes I wonder, as GPS gets better in these more remote areas, if it identifies that you're in these areas, are you skilled enough? These are hazardous areas, these are conditions. I think there's an opportunity for platforms like AllTrails, Gaia, Strava to be doing you might be following this trail, but are you sure that you have the expertise?
I think that actually is a beautiful foray into this concept that a lot of these apps, they become or are becoming, without naming names, virtual training guides, right? And so to your point, Griff, it's how does that virtual training guide help you to be aware that now you're ready for that next step, whatever that might be? Oh, you've ticked these off your list. Well, this is the next evolution and you're perfectly primed as an athlete for this thing, which I think is super cool. I like that is kind of the direction it seems to be taking, I mean, you at least know well, my sleep score is this and my performance rating is this and my, all of the other data. So how would we, be able to, use it as a gauge?
And to your earlier point, having it as a balance between peace of mind and then not getting to the point where you're constantly monitoring and you're losing yourself in tech rather than losing yourself in the moment or the adventure.
That's the tricky part, because it truly is like you have to thread this line, because we're talking about all these accessibility points that it gives us, right? But the question really becomes, what does it take away? Or just because we can, should we? You know what I mean? Like, just because you can wear all this stuff when you go out and ride, should you?
Absolutely.
One of the points I was going to make when you were discussing this, Chris, was the kind of irony. It's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, but it's kind of ironic that these tools allow us to do more. And in some ways, they allow certain people to do more than maybe they should. And then those same technologies are then being asked to almost give us warnings like, hey, are you sure you're capable of this? I guess the major point I would make is there's still a human responsibility to interpret whatever it is that you're getting as feedback, data, coordinates, this, that. There's decision making that has to go into it based on the information you're being fed. So you can't just take Google Maps directions and say, oh, the trail says I have to go this way and it's leading you off a cliff. I must go that way. Like the famous scene in The Office where they drive into the lake because the GPS told them to drive into the lake, Like you have to use your brains sometimes to make decisions.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, my personal hot take is that I think we're asking too much of technology. And again, I don't want to derail the conversation at all, but I did this darkness retreat a year ago where I just went into a cave and was in the total darkness up in Oregon for 3 days. And one of the things that was the most significant about it was that I woke up on the first day, utter darkness, no sound. I'm underground. I have no lights at all. And you can't see your hand in front of your face. So the first night I went to bed, shut off the light, and then I didn't turn on the light for 72 hours or whatever. And so the first morning when I woke up, the thing that was so interesting to me was that I basically had no idea what time it was because I didn't have a clock or my phone. And I had no clue of the time of day or anything like that. And I felt like it was such a shocking experience because I didn't have anything to tell me if I was late or if I had woken up on time. And because of that, I didn't know how long I slept. And so, you ever woken up in the middle of the night and wondered if it's the middle of the night or if it's the morning or if it's middle of the day?
Every night that happens to me.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is you kind of forget about the fact that you have an internal clock and the goal is to check in with yourself. And the first thing I thought about when I was sitting there was oh, well, how do I feel? How do I feel? Not what does the watch tell me I'm feeling? What does the score tell me? Was how do I feel? And because at that point I had to decide, am I going to go back to bed or am I going to start doing my routine, which in the total darkness is not much, but it's still life. You're going to eat and you're going to use the bathroom and you're going to take a bath or whatever you're going to do, meditate. But the point is that experience, what it taught me was that I don't check in with myself and I don't ask myself how I feel because I'm so used to waking up and deciding if I'm late and at the end of the day I have to do this. So everything I do has to go backwards from that first cup of coffee or the whatever. So I just thought that was significant. And I think that in many ways I have really tried to think about how I'm maybe what I'm asking of technology to do that I should be able to do.
This is the perfect segue to talking about our concept of reality and the cues we take from our environment and the tech that's rolling out in augmented reality, right? All of this information that gets brought back to us and the decisions we make, especially as adventure athletes and those of us who are going on expeditions or weekend trips. And so I think I'm curious, maybe the first question is, do you have any gut reflexive reactions to the concept of augmented reality being brought into adventure tech?
I mean, I don't even know what it would look like. To be honest, I've never put on a VR headset. I understand the theory. And I guarantee you there's probably ways in which that would actually be super helpful. I'm sure I can, conjure up an idea. But the question is we've been doing fine for, a couple hundred years now as a human race without it. So I don't we need it, because all I can think about is where the are we going to charge this thing? It's just one more thing to make your backpack heavier or your car busier. And I'm in the process of life where I just want to simplify everything.
Yeah.
All of it, So I actually think what's beautiful is you start to come to terms with the bits of tech that you really care about, the ones you really like, and you just want to support those brands, right? Or those pieces. And I think what's going to happen is all of it's going to kind of become congealed. Let's be real. It's not gonna be long until your phone is your Garmin inReach too.
Yeah, I was going to play devil's advocate a little bit and say, I have no interest in wearing goggles to overlay a natural landscape with data or things.
Yeah.
It seems horrendous to me. However, as Chris pointed out earlier, like he feels more safe and more productive, maybe is the word, with a phone than he does with an inReach when he's in the backcountry because of all the technology on it. And that's not augmented reality, but it's augmented information. Like we used to have a paper map. Before that, we used to have to use a compass. Like we have become very comfortable having a tool that we never had before.
Yeah.
So I'm not suggesting you're wrong, Chris, in any way. I'm with you on the AR business, but slowly but surely we get used to some of these things. And then we do have to check ourselves and say, do I need to bring out this stupid phone and look at what my elevation is right now or what time it is?
I think that the dream is really to not have to have any of it personally. I mean, that's if you want my real, personal view. I think that, the earlier question being like, that I gave myself was like, would I prefer to have that GPS, that safety button, or would I prefer to have all the information? And I think that for me, all the information is epic. I look at this as a bunch of paper maps and a book or something like that, that I could have in my backpack that I could read. And I think to me, when technology is just a reflection of something that was in the past, like a tangible tool, like a book or a compass or whatever, it's great. It allows me to have a lighter backpack, and like that's the pro. But the con is like you're connected in some way. You have something to keep you busy. And I think that those are the more subtle effects of it that I get more worried about, is like, what is it taking away that you might see or hear or smell or have to be in touch with in nature and experience without it,
I think the idea too of you're holding up your smartphone and you're saying books, maps, that's what this represents to me. Books and maps have to be appreciated prior to your adventure. They cannot be whipped out on the trail partway through to dive through this section of experts, which is where that real-time info in any of these apps or augmented reality would pop out ahead, right? Like a trail under construction, 50 yards or something. And I think one of the things we have to consider, especially when it comes to augmented reality, in even the slow way that could start to creep into adventure tech, is what happens when real-time info through something like augmented reality starts to replace people's preparation, their intuition, or their experience that you would do beforehand, collaborate with your group, make sure everyone's on the same page, because they say, oh, well, it's okay because I have my XYZ device.
Yeah. That's a good observation. I mean, I don't really know what to say about that other than, I mean, I know that, me and Chris, you and me, we kind of bonded over the fact that we just love looking at old roads on maps. Like I love the preparation part. I'm like, that's the exciting, the time spent poring over a computer screen or a map or talking to somebody, or, you travel to an area and you wonder what's up there. And then you look at it when you get back home. That's like all that preparation that then you couple with like the physical training is like super exciting to me. It's the same idea of like I save really good podcasts for those really long rides because I want to have something to look forward to. Like to me, the prep work is kind of, instead of making it a task, I really try to make it fun. And I think that that's just something you kind of have to enjoy. But I think that universally, some people will just never want to do the prep, like that's just not who they are, I guess. So I don't know that I relate to that a lot. Like those personality types are ones that I don't know that I see eye to eye with sometimes. You mentioned Kurt Refsnyder, who such a talented cyclist and adventure cyclist and one of the legend of legends for kind of pioneering new trails on mountain bike and advocating for bikepacking routes. But one of the things that he had told me, because I had worked with him a little bit to do some coaching, it's the same thought process when it comes to coaching is like, if it's not fun, you're not going to do it. And if every workout is just this grueling thing, that's okay if you're going to be an Olympian. But, if you're not, then maybe consider just making it more fun and enjoying what you're doing. And if that looks like riding some other bike or doing some other sport, that's okay. And I really took that approach this year into my training for Silk Road and other things. And that was something that I just thought a lot about. So to your point, it was kind of trying to think of new ways to reimagine the prep work being fun, making it interesting. Like save your favorite music and listen to it when you're doing it, and save your favorite TV show when you're training on the indoor trainer when it's snowing outside or whatever it is. I just try to make it be something I can look forward to.
It's really interesting knowing lots of different people who go on lots of different types of trips, big, small, medium, backpacking, bike packing, etc. The style that people bring to it. Some people are mega preppers.
Are we talking about the apocalypse or are we talking about bikepacking?
I mean, they treat it like it is the apocalypse. They are mega preppers. They know exactly the distance, how many calories per day. And then my guess is you and I, Chris, are in the boat where it's a balance between being prepared enough to know that we're going to be safe, but also leaving some mystery out there, because that's part of the joy of it, is discovering stuff that you didn't know was there because you didn't read all the blog posts about all the things. The beauty of Iceland is that you have done some of the firsts, like you've done the first this or the first that, and it feels more remote. There's not a lot of use in some of these areas, which is great. Not everybody gets that opportunity, but I just love the fact that in this conversation, you can understand that there's different approaches and no one approach is right or wrong, but people bring their own style to every aspect of it. The preparation part, the amount of technology they bring, how hard they go or how much they just sit and enjoy the views, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really cool.
I love what you're saying, because this is like speaking to my language. I truly feel like that is the magic. I'm a big prepper, not a max prepper, but like a mid.
Sure.
I'm the cool kind.
Yeah. And I like to prepare, but like my job has sort of forced me to prepare. And when I'm researching a location where I'm going, if I'm bringing a crew, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to be like fairly over prepped in some ways, but I really appreciate trying to leave some space for when I'm there for the magic to happen. And if every hour and minute of every day is planned and booked and this and that, then you never leave room for the unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
And the unexpected is like the spice of life. Like when you're a kid and you're surprised, like that's the best feeling. Like you want to be surprised. I don't know why we don't like seek that out anymore. You know, like to me, that's quintessential with joy and all the great iconic feelings is like surprise and awe is what I'm after. And we rode the Strandor coastline, which was so sick. It's one of my favorite rides I have done all year. And I've been to some rad places, but that trip with you was awesome.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, let's just go up this road, see what's there. Like we're surprised. Let's go over here. Oh, there's a market. Oh, like that is at the core of me what I love more than anything. And I think that I agree. I aim to really give people permission through social media or the work that I do to like try to seek that out. Go into situations a little unprepared in some ways, just so that you can maybe find it. And I think that sort of relates to how I approach also some of my sport and aspects of that. Like I would never want to wear, necessarily like a band with all the data while I'm racing something like the Tour Divide, because it's about being in it. And I think sometimes I get a little too obsessed with the numbers and with the data. And I thought about this like a couple months ago or maybe a year ago, because, I remember wanting to go out on a training ride and there was too many, like I didn't have a battery for this thing and this wasn't charged and I decided not to go. And I was like, that is so lame that I decided to not go and ride my bike or whatever it was, because I wouldn't have all the tools to record the things. And I'm like, that's just not what it's about.
Right. Yes.
So to get to your point, it's like there has to be some mystery, there has to be some of that. And you have to leave a little room for like what could happen.
I think what you also just touched on is what can happen with technology is this performative nature of the recap, right? I messaged Chris maybe like a year ago at this point, and I had my longest ever continuous ride, and it was all caps. And I was like, guys, I just broke so many PRs, and my phone died in the sun. What am I like? Right. And Chris's only response to my frantic moment was like, well, if Strava didn't get it, it didn't happen, Griffin.
Yeah, the ironic comment that people make. Yes.
Yes. And you talked about this a little bit earlier of people posting the Strava rides, and there's so many creative ways to post your stats or your route, right? Put your phone in the fridge, all the things that people are kind of doing, but that can impact the impetus for experiencing adventure or for what you actually seek. Are you seeking that wonder? Are you seeking that awe? Are you seeking connection with nature, physical health, or are you seeking digital external validation and approval? And so I think that can be especially potent in adventure athletes as well, because there's always a summit to be explored.
Completely agree for what it's worth. That's like the trickiest part, right? We, in our psyche as human beings, like we want to compare ourselves, right? And how we equate value to what we do. And I think that's really what it comes down to for me, is like trying to kind of get away from that, like not evaluating my last this or that because of how, if I got a PR, if I was, faster than this person or whatever it is, but like, did I enjoy it? And did I have fun? What did I find out about myself? And I think what's cool is like those longer rides, those longer experiences, which I think we're all very fascinated by, where the mind goes. The mind drifts far from those things. There is a point in every race I've ever done where I'm like, why am I racing? This is so stupid. This is, the antithesis of what I want right now. And you reflect back and you have, moments of joy and all the experiences. But I love where the mind drifts to, and it usually drifts far from looking at the data.
I think that's one of the best parts of apps like Strava, when they let you leave notes or how did you feel about the ride afterwards. I love watching people just diary the weird thoughts that they've had, or like the weird experiences. I don't want to know what new gear you had. Did you have an existential crisis halfway through this trail? Tell me all about it. Let's get into it.
Seriously. Yeah. Like, where did you go? Because that's what I am intrigued by. I mean, for me, sport is an expression of the human experience. And I think that it's a beautiful one, especially when it requires you to like do it internally, And yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. I wish that there was more tech geared towards that.
Yeah.
On a more serious note, I will say the thing about technology is that people always ask me like, what's the next social media platform going to be or whatever it is? And I've always said it's about ease of use. That's all it's about. It's going to be about ease of use. And right now, the ease of use is these two appendages, right? Our thumbs and our fingers, right? So what is going to happen, in my opinion, is when this becomes obsolete because it's implanted or it's in a pair of glasses, right? You're going to have all of those options, augmented reality built in, your phone and all the stuff. And you're not going to be using this. You're going to be using line of sight and where your eyes drift and whatnot, right? And ultimately, social media will have to catch up to that. And what I mean by that is that right now, the apps that we engage with the most, they're driven by this. They're limited by this. Does that make sense?
Scrolling,
yes.
So when this appendage is no longer the tool to use it, then it will evolve. And that's what I'm saying. I think that people need to always realize we are humans. We're going to take the path of least resistance, always, like fish, like any other animal on earth, right? So we are looking for the easiest way to get done what we want to get done. And ease of use has driven everything we do, right? That's really kind of what it comes down to. I think of that, and I mean, obviously, there are cases in which it maybe does it, but I think when it comes to like doing something hard, sport, right? That's my thought, is like, I think that augmented reality will be built into our experience when it can be integrated into a way that we can use it whilst, doing our thing, our sport, whatever that might be.
I think that the tech that I foresee potentially having somewhat of an impact, we've had a rise in adventure athletes, especially since the pandemic, people going outdoors and who have really recognized the benefit of that. There was a women's health article out today about the rise of the everyday athlete, more like the elite athlete. I think then you see apps like Sora, which is the AI video generator that kind of infuses real video and does all this. And you see it a little bit in at-home exercise equipment where you can have a different reality in front of you and you're working out to an adventure scene. You never have to leave the comforts of your own home. Or you have an increased number of kids who access the world only through their phones. But then if you ask them where have they ever actually been, it's a different impact. And so my curiosity, kind of last thing rounding out augmented reality, is are people going to kind of continuously lose a little bit of wonder and awe because they're becoming visually numb to what they can access, real or not, in their hands or on their phones, because we have constantly this wild reality put in front of us? Why would I now hike and sweat and work really hard to go see it when I can see it from my phone?
Well, we're talking about vision, right? There are quite a few other senses. So I will say that the truth of the matter is that there will be a time when you don't need to do that. In fact, what you can experience in VR will be so intense and so real that it will be real life. I mean, and this is the bigger, more challenging question is if you're watching something and it elicits the same feeling and experience as being outside, then what is the difference, right? That's just the matrix, right? That's the question. It's like it doesn't actually make a difference. You know, if somebody can find the meaning of life watching augmented reality goggles versus somebody who found it in wherever, if they got to the same place, what's the point? Doesn't matter. Right? So I know, and it's a little sickening, but it's the truth. And I think that the gap right now that we're in is that you're talking about visual, which is great, but there are a lot of other senses. There are, you know, sight and sound and touch and all those things. And so until those can be as good, then we will still seek out other experiences. And that's what you're seeking out. That's why you ride outside and not on a trainer, because you want to feel the wind against your sweaty skin. That's not a feeling that you're going to get, you know, on the trainer. So I think there are certain aspects, but I'm also very aware that's going to change. And that's going to be something that we're going to have to come to terms with.
Until then, we're traveling with you on your next bikepacking trip. That's to get the real deal.
Fast Talk listeners, during a recent listener survey, you told us you want to be able to listen to Fast Talk at work, on workouts, and during housework on YouTube. You talked, we listened. The Fast Talk podcast is now available on YouTube. We've added more than 100 of our best episodes, with more releasing every day. And soon we'll offer video summaries and other featured content that you won't be able to hear on the audio-only podcast. Search for Fast Talk Labs on YouTube and be sure to subscribe.
I'm really curious on the opinions you're going to have about all things drones. And now, before we dive too much into this, we have to be mindful that drones serve a variety of purposes depending on the person who has one, right? And now they've become so accessible that you could have a drone for a child who wants to videotape from the rooftops of buildings. The drone technology has become so pervasive that certain areas have instilled buffer zones. Like when I lived in Hawaii, if you had a drone and it got anywhere near the airport, it automatically, regardless of whether you wanted to or not, started to descend, even if it was over the ocean. So this technology has been around long enough where it's become accessible to the everyday person who has a couple $100, and to the point where some of the technology is scary good and the drones possess many other technological advances. So when it comes to adventure athleticism and being out on expeditions, I don't want to paint this dystopian picture of tons of drones in the air that you can't even see the sky, but can you give us an overview of kind of your thoughts on the state of drones when it comes to adventure athletes?
I don't know. You know, that's a question that's interesting because when technology gets to a place where everybody, when I say everybody, can afford it, what I'm talking about is if you can afford to buy an iPhone or whatever, you can afford to buy a drone. So my thought is like anybody at this point who wants to have a drone could afford a drone. I would imagine that it's met its max capacity at this point. Like I'm talking about the sales of that. I don't think there's going to be this boom where all of a sudden in the next 2 years, there's going to be drones everywhere. First of all, as you mentioned, there's buffer zones everywhere, all over Iceland, national parks, et cetera, et cetera. The fines are pretty expensive. And I think people really appreciate the fact that they aren't allowed there. In my mind, when it comes to like the professional athlete, I'm always thinking, well, that person is typically doing something that is not where other people would be in a more impacted area, right? If you are a professional skier, you're probably going to be, you know, skiing in some couloir in some remote area or on, you know, in POW. So I don't know that you're going to be as close to other people experiencing it where it might disturb them. I think it's an amazing tool personally for people to be able to document what they're doing and be able to scout places. I actually feel like in my mind, outside of just the pure visual documentation, the biggest value of drones that I've had has been when we've taken it skiing in Iceland, we're looking for an exit off of like a glacier visually. And that has saved my multiple times. This is funny because this is like stretching the whole other direction where you're like, you have a lot of technology and you're like, you might as well use it. Not that that's needed. You could look at, you know, on your phone, the shaded relief maps and figure out a route. This just made the experience more enjoyable because we found the patch of snow that led all the way down. So I find that actually for a scouting tool and for, you know, a lot of kayakers will use it. A lot of people will kind of look downstream and see what they're heading into. Climbers use it quite a bit as well. Like I see that as an awesome tool for those things. Now, I definitely also think that drone regulations will increase quite a bit. And it's requiring people like myself to have like a license to operate it if you're doing it commercially. So I just see it as becoming more managed. And I actually think that maybe 5-6 years ago, I saw way more drones in places because prior to things getting banned or stopped, like you would go to Iceland, they would be everywhere, all over, all the time. And now I hardly hear them, to be honest. So I actually think it's on a downward spiral in terms of privacy and whatnot, you know. And I agree, a lot of places that we fly, like they can put up, an airport can put up like a no-fly zone where you can't even fly into that area. So I would imagine seeing that maybe in neighborhoods. I'd imagine seeing that other places. I don't think that technology is too challenging. It's just basically places registering with the drone companies where no-fly zones are, right? And the drone has to be on GPS or it can't work. So I actually see them being more restricted quite a bit.
What would you say personally? Do you feel like you are more prepared than you used to be when you set out on an expedition based on the technology that's available to you now? Do you feel no difference because it's all relative to the sort of context of what you're willing to do? What kind of impact has it had on you personally?
That's such a funny question because it's kind of like this scale, like these two scales that you would expect to be evenly weighted. But I think what ends up happening is that your tolerance for risk on one side is here and your preparation is here. And so if your tolerance for risk is high and your preparation is low, you know, sometimes we find ourselves there. Sometimes it's the opposite. Your preparation is high and your tolerance for risk is very low or whatever it is. So ultimately, I guess what I'm getting at is that I find myself occupying both spaces sometimes. And I think that technology has played a role in that for sure. It's allowed me to feel confident in situations that maybe in the past would be a little bit more scary. I don't know that it would affect, obviously, the outcome thus far because I haven't had to push that button ever, luckily. But I know a lot of people who have. And I know a lot of people who have been caught off guard. For example, there was an Italian group trying to cross the Vatnajökull Glacier on skis. And, you know, they went to put their tent in the ground, their glacier tent. And normally you would have kind of like a little wedge that you would cover with snow and pack it down and let it freeze overnight. But they went down and there was just pure ice. It was just a sheet of ice. And the glacier, like in that spot where they were, the snow had drifted away because of the wind. And so they didn't bring ice screws. So I'm just thinking through, like, they had to get a rescue.
Mm-hmm.
Unexpected things can happen. You know, if you bring everything with you to prepare for every potential threat that could happen, that in and of itself kind of strips away some of the experience too. So it's that balance of like, well, how much risk am I willing to take? And I've done trips with friends where, you know, I envy their ignorance because they have no idea how bad something could go. And I'm sure you both relate to that. Yep. You're like, wow, you know, this experience for you was like, it's so unrealistic. And you're so, you know, I hope you can revel in this because it was epic. But yeah, I also find that those scales shift. And sometimes as you develop maybe a little bit more a thicker skin and you feel like you can endure a little bit more, maybe you're not as scared or don't feel like you need to pack all your fears on that trip, right? So I find myself kind of asking that question and judging that every time I go out. I filter this experience based upon a few things. And my filter usually looks like, how trained am I? You know, is my fitness going to make up for some of my lack of preparedness? Is my awareness of the terrain or is my food or whatever? You know what I'm saying? Like one of these things, are they going to help my lack of whatever? Knowledge, preparedness. I've never been to this country. I'm just trusting somebody. I start to kind of weigh it out like that. And I just have my own personal, I guess you could say, arithmetic as to how I weigh those things out.
That was so beautifully said. The balance between being prepared, and then you said the phrase, or am I packing my fears?
Right.
And that's such a poignant way to describe that. Am I being responsible where I'm not outsourcing my accountability to the chance of emergency services or local responders? Or am I going overboard and I'm actually just packing my fears along with me?
I love that, though. I think that that's the truth. Like, I've often thought about how many trips have I done where I've just barely skirted by, you know? Like, sometimes your confidence and experience can be very just, you know, inflated arrogance because you really just don't know how lucky you've been. And every couple times that I'm doing any trip or any experience, I kind of try to reevaluate that, you know? I try to refresh in my mind what it actually looks like to be prepared. So I don't know. I'm a little more hard on myself about it, I think. And maybe I shouldn't be, but I also think you can find a level of preparedness in your partner that you're traveling with as well. And sometimes you put a little bit more responsibility onto them, which is not my favorite thing either, but that happens.
Big question, and maybe this was the question to even start with, but we'll sort of finish with it here. Do you think wildness is at jeopardy because of advances in what humans can bring to wild places, or are we not at jeopardy of losing that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that we are for sure at jeopardy of potentially, theoretically destroying a lot of wild places, but not in the way that maybe the listener might think. I mean, in my interpretation of it is that I wish that there was like a no phone rule in the national parks, not because the wildness of the park is going to be ruined, but because our experience in that place becomes ruined by the fact that it's like another Pokemon card to collect. Like we went there, here's the selfie, let's go. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
I guess what I'm saying is how significant, this is just for a thought experiment, but how significant would it be if you like walked to the edge of the Grand Canyon and there was just like a chair there with, another tourist who's never been there, and you have to like talk to them for 2 minutes or something like that and get their interpretation.
Right.
What I'm saying is that for someone, they're going there and their jaw's on the floor and they're experiencing awe and beauty and everything. And for somebody else, they're walking up and taking a photo and then going back on their device, or, they're a kid playing with their toy or whatever, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's okay. I'm an advocate for the fact that if people are at least going there to see it, that's a good thing, as opposed to sitting at home and never seeing it or seeing it through AR, right? So with that, there are some exceptions being made, but I guess my bigger fear is not so much is the wildness on Earth going to be gone, because I feel like I see a lot of it, and there is more of it than I could ever even imagine to experience out there. It just usually requires a bit more effort. And I hope that people don't lose the concept that like through effort, we can really experience a lot of beauty. And with that, my personal biggest fear is like, I just don't want the wildness inside of people to start to evaporate, And I think sometimes spending a decent amount of time outside and offline together is like a truly invigorating and beautiful experience, and not necessarily one that needs to be examined as like a badge of honor, but just something that should be a part of our life, like our daily life in some capacity. Pursuing the feeling of awe. I also try to pursue that feeling of like, when was the last time that I asked for help? I question that every year. And I do that because that level of vulnerability when you're traveling or when you're experiencing a place, although, you could interpret that as like, oh, this person's not prepared. But for me, when every answer to every question you could ever ask is right here, why would you ever need to interact with another human being? And what I'm getting at here is that's what's important, is like interacting with human beings. When I was in China for 30 days and Kyrgyzstan for 30 days, just like 2 months ago, it had been a minute since I'd been in a third world country, and you realize that like, yeah, just because I can get every answer on this device, am I losing this part of myself that has kind of forgotten how to communicate with people, even if non-verbally, because I can't speak the language. So I guess that's what I fear, is our lack of connecting with other humans because of technology, and what it feels like to have to like, not beg, but just like have a little bit of humility in your life to like ask somebody for help, or ask somebody how to get here. Can I sleep in your back, room, or can you help me buy this food, or tell, whatever. Like those are really raw experiences that I still love and look for.
This might be the first episode I've like welled up with tears. That was so beautifully said.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more what you said, that last point, the crutch that technology can become for people, that they rely on it to replace human interaction, is kind of sad, actually. Like that detracts from the immersive experience they could otherwise have, the friends they might make, the connections they might make with humans that are literally on the other side of the earth, where they feel like, you know what? Humans aren't that different. No matter where they live, they still have the same desires. They still have the same sense of what beauty is and adventure is, and you could make that connection. But if you rely on Google Translate to help you understand what you need to buy at the little market in Kyrgyzstan instead of trying to have a conversation with your hands and gestures and your heart, maybe to some degree, then that's lost.
I think a great way to close out is something actionable that people can gain from this collective wisdom. And maybe we kind of run through a mock tech check for adventurers. So let's see if we can together give some tools, tips, tricks to find their balance between tech, peace of mind, safety, responsibility, and that true exploration, awe, wildness. So maybe we could just kind of soundboard here.
Yeah, go for it, Chris. I'd love to hear what are the essentials that you feel like are great tools, and then maybe the habits that you've formed over the years to say like, now's the time to use it appropriately, now's the time to put it down.
Yeah, I always frame it like this. Whatever's going to get between me and my subject might be the redwoods. My subject might be these actual people. You know, I remember as a young photographer being in the Middle East, and every experience I was pulling a camera up because I was really uncomfortable interacting with people. And so I guess all I'm getting at is that I try to evaluate what tech I'm bringing based upon like, okay, is this something I'm going to need to be constantly checking? Is that critical or not? Okay, so could I bring something else? Is the phone necessary? Usually it's always coming, and how many things can it take place of? So for me, it's usually, I really enjoy or appreciate having a good watch that helps me to understand at least a baseline of the calories I'm burning, because I think at the end of the day, if you're doing a big day, that's pretty important for me. And obviously this changes based upon what sport you're pursuing, but like the things I usually never leave home without and or are nice to have are usually like my phone, my watch, and some type of SOS tracking device. And that's usually based upon if I'm going out of service. For me, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going off the map in the middle of nowhere and need to have a rescue. It's more like, am I going to be out of cell range so that I need to send like an emergency text through? And I would say that the number one reason that I'm using those kind of inReach is for communication. It's a nice to have. It's not a necessity, but it's a nice to have. Now, if I'm going somewhere that's kind of more like, you know, there's two different sides. There's like the family vacation, there's like the personal day mission or whatever, and then there's like the expedition. This range, things shift. And usually I will include to that kit, you know, a small camera if I want to document it, usually like the RX100, because it's tiny, it's point and shoot, it fits in a pocket. It doesn't create a lot of distance between me and my experience. Or if I want to go more analog, I'll bring a film camera, a little point and shoot film camera, even better because I'm not even looking at it. So what I'm saying is like there's levels to this, the level of which you want to experience the place. And I like to pool all my electronics together before any trip. And I really try to evaluate how much is it going to take to charge all this stuff. And that will be the final determining factor of like, can I bring it? Is it going to die on the second day of the trip? Is it going to last the whole time? If I have to bring 20,000, 40,000, milliamp hour chargers to charge this, that's not worth it. So I have to maybe pick and choose. And that will determine a lot of times what I'm bringing. If everything I have is on one plug, that's important, right? Because you've got to also bring the stuff to charge that and the cables. And so I really try to separate all my electronics in kind of a pool, even my bike, bike batteries, this and that, because I always like to evaluate how much energy I'm needing to make this trip possible. And is it necessary, right? And then I question that. Usually I try to filter that experience. But if I'm like with that kit, the only thing I'd probably add to that, if I'm going even on like a personal work trip, just flying somewhere in Europe, is I'll just bring noise canceling headphones. And that's like if I had to have one, I'm not like I need an electric toothbrush kind of guy. Like I like to have those at home, but if I'm traveling, I don't need that. But noise canceling headphones are pretty important for me because I'm fairly sensitive. I'm a sensitive sleeper, and I'm also just like airplanes. I can't really get into the zone, and I really like to kind of zone out and write and listen to some music. And it really helps me to, in a chaotic environment, find a little sense of reprieve. So that's maybe my excess piece of kit that I bring.
That's a solid list. I echo you on the noise canceling headphones. Those are a gem for more reasons than one.
Yeah.
I think to add a few of those on, I really liked the idea of assessing the pool of tech and then reverse engineering what it's going to take to sustain them, that kind of maintenance concept. I think in addition, and some of these are you think you do, always test tech in a controlled environment before you take it out, not just testing the battery.
Always the cables too, double check them.
Yes, yes. Also pack some duct tape. Listen, the first technology
Zip
that
ties.
ever was clutch, it never fails you. I think also kind of going back to tech is not a substitute for adequate preparation or wilderness skills or fitness to that point, what you talked about earlier.
One rule for me is you have to go into those map apps, whatever mapping app you're using on your phone, and make sure they are offline. Before I get on a plane, I make sure everything that I need, say I'm going from the States to Iceland and I'm going to do some crossing, or I'm flying over to UTMB and I'm just imagining what some athlete might do is like, I download everything that's essential beforehand.
Yes.
Yeah.
On my phone. My home screen of my phone, I take all my apps when I'm doing a race or I'm doing a long hike or whatever, and I take all my apps and I put it into one folder, and I only have the apps out that are like important, like the camera or the map. And because I usually change the background just to be like gray, because even at night, sometimes you're in a tent and you'll be like on your phone, you're like, I don't want this to be like a thing to play on. I want it to be a tool, and I'm pulling it out, and I'll go so far as to delete some apps, but I just find that even if they're just hidden and they're harder to get to, like ones that are pointless, then I won't use it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Chris. So I told a listener based out of San Diego named Taylor that I would ask a question to you, and it has more to do with your mindset as an adventure athlete than your tech. And so here is the question, and the relevance as to why this is the first person who took me on adventure trips in my early 20s and comes from a long line of adventure athletes. And so when I thought of one listener that I wanted to ask, this was the particular person. So he said he was recently backpacking the Ray Lays Loop and Sequoia Kings Canyon. And while he did have perfect weather, it got him thinking of this question for you. How do you maintain your level of stoke, even amidst some of the most brutal conditions on Earth? Like most of the insane bike rides you do across Iceland's glaciers, for example. The alternate question is, do you ever question whether the suffering, type 2 fun, is worth it?
I love that. What's interesting is like, I find myself drawn to those experiences for various reasons. One of them being that I really appreciate stripping away all the superfluous aspects of life that are just irrelevant and really seeing what's important to me. And a lot of times you whittle away at all the masks and you kind of get down to what you feel and what's important. And that moment of reflection for me is what it's all about. Like, I really appreciate that internal space. Now, for sure, I can be a negative Nancy all the time. Like, I get super bummed. But that in and of itself informs you of kind of what you maybe need to think about or ponder or work on or whatever it is, like, what is this irritance that I have with this thing? Why am I feeling so bothered by whatever it is? And I honestly feel like that teaches me more than I could have ever imagined. And I seek it out because of that. Yes, I'm an optimist for sure. I'm a glass is half full person. And sometimes you also just want to test that, like maybe what does it feel like to be a glass is half empty kind of person for a moment? And I appreciate that too. There's aspects of personality and that, you get to put to the test. And I think that's what those experiences do for me. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. He'll be pumped to hear the answer.
Nice. Chris, we always like to end our episodes with 1-minute take-homes. We put you on the clock, a figurative clock, not literal. You got 1 minute to give the listener out there the most compelling nugget of knowledge from your mind about this subject matter that we've just discussed. What's the essence here?
I think that the essence really is, the more that we can learn to intimately share our experiences, the better. And as a storyteller and somebody who cares deeply about people connecting over story, doing podcasts, sitting around a proverbial or real campfire and just, talking about life, that's what I hope more people do. And I'd actually say that social media and books and films and all these types of things that we consume, this is how we usually experience it. And I would just advocate for people to open their mouth and share their experience of places and tell the world why the outside world, the natural world, is so special. For those who want to do that as a career, my only piece of wisdom is to put your own voice there. Don't go out and have the best epic day of your life or the best bike ride or whatever it is and just simply go online and say, the mountains are calling and I must go, because that's somebody else's quote. That's not yours. And you felt this experience. You rode your bike through the snow and the wind hit the back of your neck, and you saw the volcano erupt, or whatever it is that you documented. You saw sunrise in the Sierra. I don't know. You saw a duckling walk across the road. Tell me about that experience, because you are the author of your own story. And I think that people need to actually think about that. What does it mean to share something intimate or real or vulnerable with intention? Every day we have an opportunity to do that. For those of us that engage in social media or media of any kind, we have the ability to do that. And I would urge people to do it more.
I'm tempted to read something I wrote about our trip on the Strandar coast.
I think because the phone is armed and ready, I think you absolutely should.
Well, it has something to do with Iceland specifically. It has something to do with me, but it really, I think, captures what it is to me to be outside in nature. And although this episode was about technology, I feel like I don't really have a problem setting it down to immerse myself in these experiences, and whether they're collective or individual, be present. So I don't always feel like I belong in this world, which explains why I feel so content on the edges of the earth. Iceland is an edge where I feel I can fall into eternity and never have to explain my whereabouts. In the bucolic, I time travel just by witnessing a way of life. In the wild, I come to understand that time is irrelevant when space is so vast. I work hard. There are no easy miles here, which means I feel at home. Human movement is the pinnacle of will and action. I have a chance to become who I was intended to be through my own effort. It's the expression of my truth. Exertion, determination, and devotion yield the actualization of confidence, resilience, and athleticism. And thus, I fulfill a potential. My potential, my passion, my purpose. I'm an instrument I alone can play out there on the edge.
That was sick. That was really nice.
I get worked up. I used to do I still do some amount of storytelling, but I used to have an outlet for bigger stories. And I don't do that so much anymore because I don't work for Velo News and I don't write for Adventure Cycling Magazine or whatever the case may be. That just came out of me after we did our 3-day little trip in Iceland. But that place, as you know better than anybody else, Chris, any non-Icelandic person maybe, that place is so incredible, and it brings out the best in people if you embrace what it is, right? And so, I mean, there's no better place in my mind where you can go set aside the technology and just learn so much about yourself, the world, and just embrace what it is to be in a wild place and a raw place and learn from it.
Well, that was a beautiful example of, sharing that story. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm really moved by both of the things that you two have shared just now in your take-homes. I think what reigns most sharp for me right now, and what I'm thinking about relevant to my life, this is my bias, is that I have been more hesitant or outright scared of the outdoors for the last year and a half or so. And though I've been building up my exposure more and more over time and going more deeply into nature, I think after you've had something scary happen where you could have lost it all, the rawness that you remember when you go into the wild can be packing your fears, whether tangible or intangible. And I think to have a conversation like we just had is bringing up all of these other somatic experiences of experiencing awe and wonder and beauty and just the vivid experiences you have in nature that you could try to mimic elsewhere and would never be the same. I could eat a peanut butter and jelly on the couch of my house and it's going to taste like Smucker's. I have that thing overlooking a summit on a day where I can't feel my fingers. And I tell you what, Michelin star doesn't have on this PB&J. It is fantastic, right? And so I think when you pull that across the experience, if you've had one of these experiences where you're like, yeah, I'm an adventure athlete and I've done and gotten dusted by one of these experiences, I do want to bring all of this tech and I do want to overshoot because of that. I think there's a difference between being accountable for your own safety and not relying on emergency services and others, and then not having faith in yourself and your deep experiences that lightning doesn't always strike twice, thrice in the same place, the same person. So I think my takeaway for this is, yes, be accountable. Yes, do the preparation. Yes, see the beauty in the preparation and talking with others who are older than you or more experienced, or the books, dust them off. Make that part of the adventure itself. And then also really check your fears at the door before you pack and say, what will continue to make this experience beautiful, accountable, responsible, and meaningful? Because if you do pack your fears, you're going to think about them the entire time you're there too. It was more than 1 minute, but let's have it, okay?
Mine might have been 2, so.
No, you nailed it. And you guys, beautiful souls. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us. That was another episode of Fast Talk. Subscribe to Fast Talk wherever you prefer to find your favorite podcast. Be sure to leave us a rating and a review. And don't forget, we're now on YouTube, so give us a like and subscribe there too, and help us reach a new audience. As always, remember that the thoughts and opinions expressed on Fast Talk are those of the individual. We love your feedback. Join the conversation at forums.fasttalklabs.com or join us on social media at Fast Talk Labs. For access to our endurance sports knowledge base, continuing education for coaches, as well as our in-person and remote athlete services, head to fasttalklabs.com. For Chris Burkard and Griffin McMath, I'm Chris Case. Thanks for listening.